Dicey Oracle Show. I am your guide, Jess, aka Goldynfinch, an intuitive tarot reader and mystical artist. This episode is part of a springboard series to invite you into a personal tarot practice for yourself. Leading up to this one, we have how to get a deck, how to cleanse your deck being culturally appropriate rather than culturally appropriative, how to shuffle your deck and start experimenting with pulling styles. Now today we are actually going to start thinking about, okay, how might you start pulling cards daily, weekly, in order to start building up a tarot practice for yourself and learning about the cards. Now in a previous episode we talked about how your deck will most likely come with what's called an LWB, a little white book, although we talked about how it's not always white and it's not always little, and sometimes it is electronic, sometimes it's this big, sometimes it's a teeny tiny little pamphlet. But you can or cannot, you can choose to or not, to use some of that text to guide you. Now you can also use that text to argue with. You do not need to, at any point in developing a tarot practice for yourself, take any of the advice or interpretations as the end all be all. In fact, if you are truly going to develop a personal practice, it needs to be just that, personal. Take what serves you and leave other things behind. Arguing with what someone else is saying as an interpretation can actually be quite useful. When I was a public school teacher and we were having students learn new vocabulary and concepts, one of the anchor tools around that was actually providing non-examples. When we have a non-example, it helps solidify what we understand about a concept or what we believe about a concept. So you may want to take your little white book, read through it, taking notes, see where do you agree, where do you disagree, where is something sparking for you and you want to go further with that idea. So you could even create some sort of code for yourself, exclamation points where you're like, yes, I agree, question marks where you're uncertain, a star for I'm going to research this further, you know what have you. Feel free to treat this as literary analysis because it really is story. When we're looking at tarot, it is story, it is narrative. And so literary analysis is a really beautiful fit for that. So again, interact with text. Now you might also want to be interacting with multiple texts. You could pull a card and first interact with it through your own personal lens. What do you see? What do you feel? What does it remind you of? What can you think about in terms of the number and numerology? And if you are not someone who riffs with numbers and numerology, look it up. What element does this card correspond to? Fire, air, water, earth? What kind of meaning can you derive from the card, or what kind of thoughts can you ponder and meditate on based on the elements? What is the astrological correspondence? Where does the card fit when we're thinking about like the wheel of the year in terms of astrology? Thinking spring starting with Aries, ending with Pisces. Is there a planet that corresponds with your card? So there already is some areas that you could start doing a little bit of research or pondering, depending on what your background knowledge is or isn't. You can kind of start riffing with that. So a really great practice would be to pull a card in the morning and to do some of this first, journaling and thinking through your own personal lens, and then start branching out to what other people have said about the card, the number, the correspondence, maybe even looking at a few other images of your card from other decks. For example, why that can be helpful is some of the decks are going to be more of this like Marseille style. Some of your decks, I'm just showing you the death card because we are, right now when I'm pressing filming, we are right here on the eve of Scorpio season. So corresponding with Scorpio season is the death card. The death card is a major arcana card, one of the 22 cards, 0 starting with the Fool, 22 ending with the World. Here we have 13. So this is, again, like I said, more of this Marseille style interpretation where we can see like the decapitated heads and limbs, which is like a nod to death coming through and reducing our activity and like ego death. Here we have the Smith Rider-Waite. And a lot of the decks that you may have seen on the market or that you may be working with right now are likely clones of the Rider-Waite. And then we also have more like contemporary, modern interpretations as well. So comparing your card, the imagery of your card, to a couple other decks, which is a really easy Google search, or go to Instagram and put in a hashtag the death card, and you'll see a wide variety of different styles. And that could be a way to begin comparing and contrasting and thinking about what you're thinking about a card initially. Can it go somewhere else based on the imagery that you're seeing elsewhere? The more you study, the more you'll start to see this kind of nod and these threads that are being combined. For example, this figure's head being tilted back almost like it's decapitated is, again, this nod to the Marseille style with the decapitated head here, right? The ego death, our thoughts, right? Our thinking. Here at the bottom, this black goo can make us think of the cave of the underworld going into Scorpio season. We can be thinking death, right? Transformation, going into that cocoon, breaking all down into a big pile of goo, and then emerging as something new, as something transformed, as the butterfly. And you can see this butterfly, like the new, the emerging, the optimism, the transformation in this card where we have the sunshine here in the background. So the more you study, and it's going to take time, but the more you study, the more you can kind of see some of these nods to tradition and tarot lineage as in the modern interpretations as well, if you find that useful. There's also nothing wrong with, and I would definitely encourage you to simply just riff with a card without the lineage, without all the symbols. Just what do you see? What do you feel? If these cards are housing the human experience and you are a human experiencing humanity, you will clearly recognize a lot of the symbols intuitively through a collective consciousness. So trust yourself. So much of tarot is around trusting your inner knowing, and what may be coming through for you on a random Wednesday in October could be very different for you on a random Friday in December, because already your human experience, when you pull the same card a month later, could have shifted. So again, just constantly trying to give you permission to not have to always consult the book, but to consult yourself as well. So, like I said, you can pull a card in the morning and journal, make some notes, do some study, or hold off on the study. Pull a card in the morning, do some of your journaling and your thoughts about what the card might be saying to you, what you can learn from the card, and then go about your day. And then in the evening, come back to it and think about how did that card, that energy, this imagery, the themes, the archetypes, whatever, maybe present themselves to you during the day. What can be learned from that experience? If nothing presented itself, that's fine, right? It's absolutely fine. And then in the evening, maybe that's when you want to then do some of your study. There's no right or wrong way. Some people like to pull cards at the end of the day to help them reflect back on the day that they just experienced. And again, just one card. What that does is it allows you to study a card and also to think about how the energy of a card stepped forward for you subtly or really explicitly throughout your day. Now, you can also obviously pull more than one card. You could also do 2 card spreads, 3 card spreads. I personally would not advise more than that right now when you are beginning to develop a personal practice, because the more cards that you have out in front of you, when you're not feeling real confident, the more overwhelming it can become and the more frustrated you may become. Now, if this is not resonating with you and you're like, I'm ready to put out 9 cards, I'm ready to, then obviously do you and take notes. You can photograph your spreads and your cards and come back to them. So 2-card spreads, 3-card spreads, just a simple Google will present a ton of spread ideas for you. Your little white book probably has anywhere from 2 to 6 suggested spreads at the back of the little booklet or book that you could be experimenting with as well. Now you can also start experimenting and have fun. Something I like to do on occasion is to think about the numerology of the day. So for example, today is 10/22/2019. If I reduce that down to a single digit, I would get a number. From that number, I can then go to the deck and pull all the cards that are related to that. Let me give you an example, not using the numerology for today, but using the astrology season, the astro weather. If we are just now diving into Scorpio season, Scorpio's knocking at our door, that is the death card. So maybe on the eve of Scorpio, I would be invited to find the death card in my deck, which is number 13, and reduce that down to a single digit. 1 plus 3 is 4. And then go to my deck, 13, 4, and pull all the 4s. What would I come up with? I would come up with the Major Arcana Emperor, 4, the 4 of Pentacles, Earth, the 4 of Swords, Air, the 4 of Cups, Water, and the 4 of Wands, Fire. And I could start thinking about what do all of these 4s have in common, and then to challenge myself to be thinking about these larger energies, because these 4 elemental ones that we have here, the 4 minor arcana, what can I then learn about these through the lens of this major card? Or what can I learn about this major card by applying these minors to it? What might I learn about death, this 4 energy, through these cards, and vice versa? So if you're feeling ready to kind of grapple with more cards and to kind of riff with them a little bit, just kind of experiment with that and see what happens. Something else that's fun to do is to shuffle your deck with a card in mind. So right now, thinking the death card, I could shuffle this deck, spread it out, face up, looking for the death card, and then finding which card presents itself below the death card and which one is on top of it, and then riff with that. How might I do something like that? I could be thinking about, to create a spread, okay, what am I unbecoming? What is melting away? What is dissolving in this season of my life right now? And what is trying to become? What is being invited in? That would be a real simple, again, just kind of playing with the cards themselves. So I guess to recap, to get started right now, do some study, do some agreeing and disagreeing with the texts that you come around, compare cards with other cards from other decks, start pulling 1 card in the morning or in the evening, then move to start experimenting with 2 to 3 card spreads, and then play around with the numerology to then go in and find all of those cards related to that number and see what can develop for you. We'll continue thinking about this idea of studying the cards because there's so many things and so many methods. And I would love to show you, some ideas with that in terms of just going to each of the individual suits and tracing the major arcana from 0 through 22. I'd love to encourage you to like, to comment, to subscribe, to share this episode with anyone that you know that's going to be really interested in getting started with their own personal tarot practice. Until next time, tweet tweet.